Hello and welcome back once again to Yellow Card TCG. Zystral here bringing you an overExplained this time, finally going over post-premium history collection Victor. Now, I showed a combo video for this a few weeks ago, back when we were still experimenting with it, and now that the history collection is released in Japanese, we finally confirmed that the strides, the errated strides, do indeed give you 2 axial circles, giving the deck a lot more access to plus, which in turn makes finding your combo pieces way more reliable. So if you haven't seen the combo video already, there's a link up in the corner as well as down in the description. It's pretty high roll, it requires a lot of moving pieces for a Vanguard combo. It's not as easy as Highlander or NLK, but I think the potential to win the game on the spot right there is a lot higher. And there's also got a bit more flexibility and variance in the combo based on what pieces you see and what you know your opponent has access to. So in this overexplained, I'll go over the deck list that I finalized on, as well as show you some gameplay options and some different routes of comboing. So let's jump straight into it. So here's the list I used in my combo video. I'm not going to explain every single card choice or what it does. If you want to read card effects, there's a link to the deck log down below where you can read everything. Here I'm more going to explain combo lines, ratios, and a few other options for cards you might want to play. So the triggers don't really make a big difference. I put a 2-2 split of the non-Victor crits just to try out. In reality, you'll probably want more of the 10k in-soul crit more than anything, just so that your Vic 10 column is a bit more threatening. You already have enough stride fodder between G Arashid and extra Cosmo Lords anyway. Break Pass is important because it's a draw on the defensive, which is great. But the grade 1 lineup is where I think deserves the most focus. So you've got your defensive tools in the form of Rollox and Sanctitude. That pretty much can never change. You could maybe cut a Rollock down to 2 copies, but that's really greedy, I think. Playing 0 Rollock in History Collection, where you have to put much more effort into surviving your opponent's going first turn, is way important. So being able to reliably see those Rolocks when you need them by turn 3, I think is really critical. Malyaki and Scarlet Bird are your combo pieces, so you might think, why are you only running 3 of each if they're so important? And the answer is that you only really need 1 of each. Sure, extra Scarlet Birds are nice, but you don't have Brutal Jacks, you don't have ways of resting during the main phase. So spamming Scarlet Bird is not really something that this deck can or should be doing. So you only need 1. Likewise with Malyaki, you only need 1 in front of the Cosmo Lord. If you can make a double column of 2 Malyakis, 2 Cosmo Lords on each side, amazing. But you don't really need that, as you see from the combo videos and the lines of gameplay that you're about to see later on. 1 Malyaki, 1 Cosmo Lord is more than enough to be putting out well over 20k worth of power across your board. Now you could bump up to 4, just to see each one a little bit more reliably, but again, then you'll be cutting into space in the rest of that, which is very, very tough. And we're already only running 3 G Arashid already, which, given how History Collection works and how aggressive the games tend to be about finding your G grade 3s, hitting your new superior strides and going from there, 3 might seem not enough to find the right Victor. Or in some cases, if you're going second and you can survive your opponent's going first turn, turning your G Victors into V Victors could be very relevant. But again, it's more of a case of they only provide 1 singular purpose and nothing else. And in this case, I'd rather make room for cards that provide multiple purposes. So in this case, we're looking at the grade 2s now, which we are running all at 4 ofs. And Cool Hank and Golshachi both do the same thing, which is that they can restand your Cosmo Lord once again for extra Malyaki combos. But in this case, they also do other things. Cool Hank being a ride target that can draw you a card, and Golshachi being a 16k backup restand target, so that when you're on the Vic 10 turn, the stride skill from Victor can stand the Cosmo Lord, and then Vic 10 itself will stand the Golshachi, giving you 2 lots of columns that are 20k plus. This importance alone is what I think is much more relevant in terms about getting ratios right and seeing what you need to see so that you can always do something. For example, if you have Cosmo Lord and no Malyaki, Scarlet Bird is basically a dead card. Likewise, Malyaki without Cosmo Lord isn't necessarily a dead card, but then Malyaki without any ways of restanding beyond Victor and Vic 10 is kind of lame, because then you're only getting maybe 8, maybe 12k max to the board. Whereas Golshachi and Cool Hanks on their own, without Malyaki, without Cosmo Lords, are at least still doing something, especially when combined with Sazanda, which is arguably the best card in the deck. There are a few other options you could run in these slots here. You want to trim down to maybe 3 Cool Hank or 2 Scarlet Bird or whatever. Gunsdon is the #1 prime candidate, giving your board resist, given how popular Narukami is going to be. seems very, very viable. It is pretty useful in a lot of ways just to protect your board, and it can also itself double as a restand target to get extra huge power with Victor's Stride skill, with Golshachi, whatever, maybe even with Scarlet Bird if you're doing it early, but then you don't get as much power. If you do want to run it, probably 2 copies only because it'll only come up a handful of times. It's a really good body when you're going, say, into like the 2nd or 3rd stride turn. You maybe re-ride the V Victor, go into your GB8 or favorite champ, and then you have a huge body from the first restand combos that you can then swing with to get over defensives. But here, in this case, I'm more about find combo pieces, go for combo pieces, and go from there. And then the main area where a lot of the quote-unquote slots of the deck are taken up will be in Cosmo Lord. And even though this deck is entirely relying on the Cosmo Lord Malyaki combo, you could actually just cut Cosmo Lord altogether and maybe run some more generic pieces like the Guns Dons, maybe even Gerald Hawks, maybe a few other grade 2s like Ninjad. But the downside to Ninjad is that this deck uses A lot more counterblast because of G Victor's stride cost, and B, you're not actually flipping as much because you're not first riding Busted, you're not first riding Winning Champ, so you're actually not going to get to high counts of GB. Therefore, Ninjad's power boost will usually only be 2k at most, very rarely more than 6 on the first stride, so it's kind of wasted there as well. Different G decks will have a different split on their G and V counterparts for their grade 3 boss unit. Here, I think going for a 3-1 split makes sense because even going second, a lot of the times, striding Vic 10 is probably your best option because of the ability to get a full board restand and a bit of extra extension on the Malyaki Cosmo Lord combo. 2-2 split is fine, but then you'll probably want to bump Arashid up to 4 so that you can reliably hit the G Victor to go into the Vic 10 going first, even though V Victor can then combo into Busted going second for a lot more plays. But because you don't have as many restand options in the form of stand triggers like Energy Girl or Catchy War, you don't have Gerald Hawks, you've only got 4 grade 2 restanders on the board, being able to get to like 7 or 8 drives with a Busted is actually very hard, and you don't have ways of generating extra soul either, and you're actually using a lot of your soul on the Scarlet Bird during the main phase anyway, so being able to get the full mileage out of V Victor is actually very, very difficult. Some lists will also want to play Zubat Victor, which I think is not awful going second, but you don't get the Axel from the V Victor, and then you don't get the double Axel from Vic 10 if you go into Zubat, so the payoff for Zubat I think is way lower than it should be, especially in a fast, like, turn 3, turn 4 format like History Collection. So I don't disapprove of lists playing Zubat, I just think it's not worth the opportunity cost or the risk to do so, and to play the Zubat, again, you're giving up consistency because Arashid can search for Zubat, but then you're not Arashiding for either Vic 10 combos or the Axel marker, which is, I think, is just giving up way too much to really be good. Looking at the G zone, there's actually a little bit of flexibility there as well. Stark is completely unnecessary. You could run, say, a second Busted or a second Merciless. The options are pretty flexible. The only things I say you will definitely need are going to be at least 1 favorite champ, 1 as the bulk, just to be able to do things if you don't have other restanders, and also Busted itself as a non-counterblast option. The G-Guards, again, pretty flexible. Dismal's not super necessary, but I'm always a fan just to protect Malyakis. You could run a 3rd Dogen tie-in. I don't think you need the Counter Charge 2, Soul Charge 2 G-Guard anymore, Junior. You definitely don't need a 3rd Stiff Need, and any other G-Guards Nova Grapple has access to don't get enough shield value to be worth it. So at this point, you could probably consider running like maybe the Progenitor Dragon, because you can go into the V Victor, discard the G Victor to go into Progenitor, and then that gives you free strides again. But given the fast-paced nature of History Collection, it's very rare that you'll get to that second stride with enough hand to do anything, especially if you aren't having that massive plus off of the first stride Busted, and you aren't forcing a lot of cards out of your opponent's hand with the first stride Vic 10 Cosmo Lord combo. So it's not really ideal here. You're just looking to be able to get to combo as soon as you can, have 3 to 4 counterblast to be able to go to the moon with, and then hopefully your opponent won't be able to do enough to kill you on the crackback, even though you're at maybe 3 damage. Again, the reason the grade 1 combo pieces are trimmed down to 3 ofs is just for ride ratios. Because there's no ride deck, you only have so many draws, and Nova Grappler doesn't have the grade 2 V promo cycler yet at the beginning of ride phase. you need to be able to ride grade 1 reliably, and playing 12 grade 1s gives you the best way of doing that. Like, if you go first, riding Rollock is no problems at all because it lets you keep combo pieces in hand, and going second, you can always ride the Arrow Sheet and swing under your opponent's 8k Vanguard to deny them damage in the early game, because then by that point, you should be able to draw other stride pieces or stride combos to be able to just go to like a normal Buster turn from that point on. So here's the overall list. This is just like the second draft. I think there are a few tweaks and optimizations to be made here and there. I don't think it's that playable for the upcoming BCS season when History Collection drops, but in terms of like casual play or locals, having the Malyaki Cosmo Lord column and just calculating numbers where you're giving 4k to is really, really enjoyable, and I think it's got a lot of fun to like experiment and figure out, A, how do I stay alive, given how weak Nova Grappler's main deck survival tools are, and then how can I sequence my attacks to get the greatest power gain, how do I make magic numbers, how do I play around defensives. There's a lot of potential to this deck, provided things go a little bit correctly. And so coming up now, like with all overExplained, I'm going to show you some gameplay loops with post-commentary, so I'll be talking over this as we go through, and just showing like some games with Tony where I was testing this out, why I did what I do, give some more combo examples, some situations where the deck does well, some scenarios where you don't get the combo and what you can do there. Like you narrowly almost win games and you narrowly lose games, but it just goes to show that this deck really is not tier 1, but there's still a lot of potential behind it. So in this scenario, I was able to go first. I've only got 2 damage, so I don't have that much extensions. Cosmo Lord will cost the counterblast, Golshachi will cost the counterblast, Victor's Stride effect will cost the counterblast. So because I've only got 2, I can't use all of them here. So I'm going to have to give up Victor's on Stride for the grade 3 effect. So the only way I will be able to stand outside of Cosmo Lord itself will be with Vic 10 and Golshachi. So I lose out on attack, but I've got full combo. I've got the extra Scarlet Bird, I've got a second Malyaki for rid of extra reach, but it's not going to make a difference. It'll hit numbers. The 14k column against my opponent's 9k Vanguard. But here, I'm just choosing to go full commit because I'm low on damage and I'm unlikely to die. And even though I'm against Narukami, he's gone grade 2, so there's no G-Guards coming up. But I am aware that I don't want to put him to 4 damage immediately because I risk dying to the sweep command when he rides that. But if I can push him to 4 or 5, then maybe I can survive his slightly weaker first few strides. Because now that I've got the full board and the 2 Axels, the only way he can fully clear my board for an Exterminate is if he rides the sweep command and also has ways of clearing the other 2 bodies on the board as well beyond that. So here I'm just realizing that the Malyaki doesn't make a difference because I can't stand it, so I'm actually going to put the Golshachi in front of the Arashi to make slightly better numbers. That way I can still have 5 attacks that hit Vanguard without having to commit an extra 5 to 10k shield from hand. Now you'll notice that he has the Demolition Dragon behind the Vanguard as well, and this is actually a really difficult choice because I need Counterblast to actually combo, but I don't want him to draw too many cards to defend with. So his hand is not that healthy, but it's also not so small that I can reliably one-shot him from here either. So I'm planning my attack plans and thinking like, do I want to put triggers on the Cosmo Lord, or do I want to wait and maybe put a trigger on the Golshachi so that it hits decent numbers as well, maybe hits over defensive, because right now it's only going to be 16. I can't give it the +7 because I can't stand it because I don't have the Counterblast. So, and I definitely want to stand the Cosmo Lord twice with its Counterblast and with the Vic 10 at the very least. So does the third restand on the Cosmo Lord make a difference versus the extra 7k on Golshachi? And given that I've got procs on Malyaki, an extra 7k swing versus an extra 12k when the Cosmo Lord attacks for the 3rd time, I think makes better difference. So here I'm just going committing actually not that hard, and I'm actually spreading the power out. So I attack with the Golshachi, not using the effect, and I'm attacking with Cosmo Lord unboosted here, which means that I will be able to use Victor's skill to stand the Golshachi, and then it'll swing for 16k on its own. But that's a risk I took because I saw no defenses coming in the first 2 swings. The Sazanda is always going to go last, and that's going to be able to carry the triggers. But here, being able to force an extra 16k I think makes a big difference. He needs the guard here. The heal guarding comes down, so right now Golshachi doesn't hit. And I'm now going to play around maybe a second heal guardian or a second defensive, putting up to 29, which means that I don't need to actually boost the Malk until the end, because I won't be able to restand the Malyaki. This is important because I need to hit over the defensive, I need to push some damage but not too much damage, and being able to keep the booster with as many power pumps on it as possible is what will help me do that if he has the second heal Guardian or he hits the defensive at this time. So calculating his potential guard values and how much damage I want to do, here I'm actually putting auto the trigger onto the Golshachi and realizing that, you know what, it's fine, I've got the on-hit stand from Vic 10 to stand the Cosmo Lord to then boost with the Malyaki later, and I'm actually just going to use Victor's, the grade 3 Victor's Stride skill Counterblast 1 to stand the Golshachi itself, instead of using the little Golshachi to stand the Cosmo Lord again, because this gets me one extra attack, which might be what I need to push that 4th or 5th damage, as opposed to just a big Cosmo Lord only swinging one more time. So the defensive coming down here puts him at 29. So the Golshachi fortunately does still hit, but it means that I do need to assign some of the 4Ks from Cosmo Lord's power procs onto the Golshachi instead, which makes for very unfortunate defensive power lines, meaning that when I swing with the Cosmo Lord and he takes it and gets on a defensive, that will then cancel out the plus 12k I'll have given it from the Cosmo Lord. Sazanda meanwhile still gets bigger and bigger, so that's not a concern here, but it means that if I want to try and close out the game, get him to 5, maybe even 6, it's going to be a lot harder to do, and him sitting at 3 means that he can now more easily control his damage, so that he can go up to 4 if he wants to go into sweep command, or stay at 3 if he wants to draw this game out and start deconstructing my board. So fast forwarding here, he got the other defensive, putting him up to a 39k base, and he had one last PG in hand to be able to guard the massive Sazanda swing. And we see there that his hand's gone down to about only 3 or 4 cards, so not down to 0, he can still ride, stride, and play the game, and staying on 5, but it forced him a lot, and now he needs to basically hit the sweep command and find the nuts off of the sweep command to be able to launch an offensive back on. And because I've still got the full front row, the Exterminate is still not as threatening without Sahales or Cho'os, so I'm probably looking at only a stun verse here rather than the Exterminate, which is a lot easier to survive given that I'm only on 2 damage and I can afford to tank like 2 or 3 hits. So I'm going to end this game here. I actually take another stride turn and I win on that turn, even through a defensive G-Guard. But just goes to show that even though my opponent had the double Sahel in hand, the full setup ready to play, because of how much I whittled down his resources, the offense back wasn't nearly as threatening as it could have been. No Choa restands, no Regalia, the Stunverse wouldn't have done much either. And even though my drive checks weren't amazing, I didn't plus that much, no Gerald Hawks, no extra drives from Busted. I still had exactly what I needed to be able to guard enough attacks, survive, keep some board, and still have pieces in hand with which I can stride and go again next turn. So I end up striding Busted, only gained like 2 extra drives because I didn't have a Scarlet Bird, I didn't have much soul, and I only got like 4 or 5 attacks, but they were more than enough to round out that game. So here's another scenario where, again, I've gone first, and I've got some combo pieces in hand, but the difference between this game and last game is that I don't have that many more combo pieces in hand. So he reveals a crit on top of his deck, and I don't want to take the damage because I can't abuse that extra counterblast. So you see here, I'm going to be able to go into the Vic 10, do the regular things, but I only have 1 Malyaki, my draws weren't that great. I've got the Cosmo Lord, I've got the Scarlet Bird, but the rest of my attacks are not that impressive. So there's not that much I can actually do. Like, I don't have the second Gol Shachi, I can't abuse all of the counterblast. The attacks themselves are only going to be like 2 restands at most. So keeping myself low on damage, knowing that I'm unlikely to be able to actually like close out the game in this scenario, to me is a lot more valuable. But one really cool line of play that I do here is that I call Break Pass to the front row and then rest it for Cosmo Lord, and then I stand it again with the Scarlet Bird, so he gains the 5k from the Sazanda, and now the 4k crit gains 5k from Sazanda, and does now hit his Vanguard for good numbers. So I'm still poking for 5k shield, the crit will then go into Soul to draw a card and 5k to the Vanguard, and still provide value from that point on. You see that the PG meant that I've only got 3 cards left in hand, and none of them were guard values, or none of them were combo pieces. So here it's more just the case of, maybe try and push the game. Again, it's OTT, so the hand is huge, so I'm unlikely to win the game here. I don't have to play around Damage Denial or Limit Break or anything like that, but I do have to be aware that he's probably going to stride Momo and go for his own OTK next turn, which is why I need this draw from the crit to try and find like Sanctitude or another Heal Guard or something like that, because I didn't have another grade 3 to discard for Vic 10. And you can't use crits or arrow sheets to go from Victor into Vic 10. So having to discard the heal there to go into the Vic 10 was a little bit damaging, but the crit forces out the intercept, and now I start the basic combos again. So here at this point you can see that he's only on 4 damage. He was able to guard a few of the major big swings and then use the heal guard to make it so that anything that basically wasn't Cosmo Lord or Sazanda wasn't a threat. I did get the heal and the drive checks, which was really useful. It gives you some defensive tools, but because I didn't have as many combo pieces in hand, no Cool Hank, no Gol Shachi, no ability to extend, I wasn't able to force that much more damage or that much more hand size. So he's able to maintain a decent enough hand go into the grade 3, stride Momo, and then kill me from there. So it just goes to show you that the combo has a lot of potential, but it also has a very low floor as well. Like, if you aren't able to extend and really force a lot of advantage in that first aggro, you're actually going to be in a really tough position to recover from that point onwards. So because I'm not actually against Narukami, my board survives. The heals I found were able to guard me and survive the turn. I took a gamble on no guard in the Momo swing, but I got some really good defensives. And being able to remake a board also enables me to stride into something else. Now, because I don't have a second pair of Vic 10, I've got no actual other way of standing the Vanguard from the Vanguard column. But because I used the Break Pass last turn, I've actually got enough soul to be able to Scarlet Bird and then proc Busted for +2 drives here. So it's not the greatest swing. I don't have any more extensions from the Vanguard column, but it's still 2 extra drives, which gives me triggers that I can put onto the Cosmo Lord or the Cool Hank to make numbers, and then continue with just more raw attacks from that point onwards. So a really big turn coming out here, being able to keep another Cool Hank as well, despite all the guarding that I had to do, all the damage that I took. Still able to survive with 1 card in hand that I drew off of the Scarlet Bird, make a full board, and now I've got at least 3 attacks, 1 from the Cosmo Lord, 1 from the Cool Hank, and then 1 more from the Victor's Stride skill itself. So this is full combo. My opponent's on 4 damage. They've got a pretty healthy hand, but I should be able to force through just with the sheer amount of raw power gain from Sazanda and Malyaki alone. Now here's a much more disadvantageous situation for me. In this game, I've gone second, and because there's a force matchup, you've seen that I actually have to call the crit behind the Vanguard just to hit numbers to be able to force some damage through. We're both fairly low on damage, and in this case, I've actually got a few combo pieces in hand, so I can take a bit more damage, go to maybe 3 or 4, and hopefully be able to go full combo on the swing back. Of course, that does involve surviving this swing, because there is a lot of damage coming my way, a crit and drive on the MLB as well. This is actually one of the more difficult turn 3s to actually survive in the current premium meta game, close nearly to Spike Bros. A nice good defensive there is really helpful, but I'm still facing an uphill struggle. The only thing I can be grateful for is that there's no Flogels on the board, so there's capped out at 4, maybe 5 attacks at most, which will keep me in the threshold of 3 to 4 damage that I want to be in. The roll-up comes in really huge there, and the defensive crit there on the draw, plus the defensive I'm about to get on the last swing. Even though there's a lot of triggers coming down onto that Blasted Blade, I do need to guard it because it's going to be a little bit too threatening. I don't want to just take up to 5. So, Heal Guardian, -2 crit, because I do want some damage, because I've got a bunch of combo pieces, and that draw finds me another piece and gives me all the resources I need to be able to ride. And even though I'm going second, you see here that I'm still thinking about riding G Victor and going into Vic 10 just for the double Axel and just for the guaranteed multi-restand power on the first stride. The reason it took me so long to decide what to actually stride there was because I had, as you can see, I have to give up another heal to be able to actually discard a grade 3 to go into Vic 10. I thought about striding Busted here as well because I had the soul, I could then use Magna Gust to gain an extra soul, and I was actually able to go up to 7 drives, 1 from Victor's effect, 1 from the Cosmo Lord, 1 from the Cool Hank. But that wouldn't have been enough to actually force out pressure, and without the Axel Circles, without the ability to go full Scarlet Bird combo at that point, I felt like it wasn't worth it. But discarding 2 heals cuts off a lot of defensive powers, so my thinking here is that I now need very strong aggro, and I basically need to push my opponent to be unable to play the game in his next turn for this to be worthwhile. Now, even though I said I had a bunch of combo pieces in hand, it's mainly Sazanda and Cosmo Lord. You see me calling the arrow sheet there shows that I don't have the Malyaki, so my numbers aren't going to be very good in this scenario, and in fact, because I don't have the Malyaki, swinging into the 18k base Vanguard that he has is actually going to be very, very difficult for me. So even though Vic 10 doesn't reach its full potential, the fact that it gives 5k to whatever it stands means that the Cosmo Lord column will still at least be able to do something. The plus 10k basically from it and Sazanda will be able to make sure that Cosmo Lord will always need at least 10k shield to guard, which is better than nothing, given that I am now fighting from a recovering position here. Now here I'm just calculating the guard, seeing how much I can do. I managed to get quite a bit of value last turn, despite not having the Malyaki, but he still has full combo, he still has the Flogles, goes up to a bunch of damage that he can use to pay for the Flogles, and now I'm just making sure that I can actually guard everything, but with the extra force markers, I can't guard everything, I need to hit defensive, so I'm unable to do so, and that's just going to be called game early. Again, here's a game where I go second, which is obviously not preferable in History Collection. My opponent doesn't have History Collection deck, so I'm not at risk of exploding on turn 3, but it is Regalia, which does have access to the Marduk play, which I'm playing around here, and I'm holding on to PGs, getting ready for that. I do want to take some damage, but at the same time, in this current hand, I actually don't have G-Vector, and I actually used Arashi to find the V-Vector, because I knew I was going second. And because I don't have that many combo pieces in hand, I'm actually planning to ride V-Vector and go into Busted and do combos from there, because I don't have the ability to go commit to a big Vic 10 turn. And here, he doesn't have enough soul for the Marduk, so I can just roll lock here and be safe. And then this last column is fairly simple to guard, and there's not that much pressure coming in. Against a more high-rolly Regalia deck, there'd be a lot more to deal with, and I would be on a much worse position. But then that would make riding V-Vector and going into, say, a non-Vic 10 stride all the more worthwhile. So here you'll actually see me changing my mind, and instead of discarding the heal to stride, I'm discarding the Cosmo Lord to stride. I could have called the Cosmo Lord over the Malyaki and continue to try to combo and just normally stride Vic 10, but here I feel like the defensive power of the heal is worth way more, and because I've got one Golshachi on the board from the V-Victor's on-play skill, and a second Golshachi in hand, and a fair bit of soul because I'm not using Scarlet Bird, and one extra soul from the Break Pass, I actually feel like this is a reasonable time to go into Busted. I know that I can get up to 7 drive checks, which is going to be really good for dealing with Regalia's multi-combo, and I'm still going to be able to put some pressure on, and then eventually scale out and go play a more traditional Nova Grappler line using Favorite Champ or whatnot. But instead of Busted, here I'm going to Merciless Dragon, because as you see I've got the double Golshachi line, and by not committing to the Malyaki Cosmolord combo, even if I'd gone to Busted here, the numbers on my side columns would have been really, really weak. Like, we're looking at 16, maybe 21Ks at best, and not having Sazanda on the board is what causes me to not want to go to Busted. So instead, going into Merciless gives me a little bit more pressure on the Vanguard column. I don't get as many drive checks in total, so my plussing isn't as good, but I get to put a bit more damage on the board and filter the few cards in my hand and try and find more defensive pieces like my Sanctitude or my draw PGs. Now, what I'm doing here is that, because I know that my columns are going to be very weak without the Sazanda, I want to still get mileage out of the Malyaki where I can, so I'm going to be restanding my rearguard break pass a bunch of times before I put it into Soul on the final Vanguard swing, so that when it attacks the last times, it can get at least 1 or 2 power pumps of the Malyaki onto my Golshachis, so that I hit over defensive trigger with the 23, maybe 26k Golshachis from that point onwards. That's kind of what I'm aiming for, and looking to get that value from the Malyaki with the Break Pass was one of the other reasons that I chose to go into the Merciless Dragon. So my final drive check, I do get the heal that I need. I realize at this point that I actually sequenced my attacks wrong. I should have been going with the one on Axel first, so that the final swing would be on the one on not on Axel, which would stand the one on Axel and give me a slightly bigger final attack to go with. But this result is still fine. I've still got put him up to 4 damage, heal down to 2. I can take 1, maybe 2 attacks during the next turn and try and guard the rest and hopefully survive from there. So let's fast forward through his turn as I survive and see how I can finish him off. I do get a very lucky heal trigger, which keeps me alive. As you can see, I actually would have lost the game without it. And so now I'm just planning out what few combo pieces I have left, what sort of attacks I can do, and therefore what I can stride. But given that I have the Cosmo Lord, Favorite Champ seems to be the best line of play here, and because I've got all the counterblast face up, there's actually a particular line I can do where I can rest Cosmo Lord and Malyaki to activate the effects, but not actually needing Scarlet Bird because Favorite Champ will stand them anyway, and then I can continue comboing from that point on. So from here on out, it's just making a board, filling pieces, and then beginning to attack, and I've got enough full board restands with Favorite Champ here that I can whittle through his entire hand, and he would basically much need a defensive overtrigger to survive this. So that's it for this episode of Overexplained, where we go over post-premium History Collection Victor with some of the changes. I know that the games weren't that ideal representatives because they were playing against non-History Collection decks, but like I mentioned, given how much higher the ceiling goes in premium after this, you can definitely expect Victor to be like tier 2 at best. You know, it's fun, there's a lot of potential. Even though that it's built around the specific combo of Cosmo Lord Malyaki, there are still other lines, other options. It's still got that, figure out this puzzle element of Nova Grappler that I really love. As always, I'm going to keep iterating the deck. I'm going to work on it up to the History Collection release. So check us out on Twitch if you're not already. I'll be posting lists there for other decks as well, like Vanquisher after the full Bronto ban, Messiah, a few other bits and pieces. But if you want to see more content like this or similar other TCGs, as always, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you all very soon on Yellow Card TCG. Until then, take care, have a great day, bye bye.